So you know it's not a crime to be fascinated by all things criminal. And if you do like delving into the underworld, why not join us for a special live show on March 27th at the Cork Opera House? We'll be talking about the making of a cartel and all the wild and crazy stories that happened along the way. So why not join us for this special live show? Tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie.
So, Roisin, you've been doing a bit of work in the area of romance scams for crimeworld.com. Can you just tell our listeners from an Irish perspective how much of a problem romance scams are both north and south of the border?
Well, we were all getting in the mood for Valentine's Day, which is how this arose. So the Garda figures for romance scams in 2025 there was 2.8 million euros stolen, mainly from women, an average of 27,000 euros per loss. So the north and south were about 200 people targeted, and the PSNI figures were similar. The losses of up to one woman lost £40,000 in a romance scam.
Oh my God, they're staggering. Like, they're staggering numbers, really.
Yeah, absolutely heartbreaking. Yeah, I mean, that's life-changing loss of money.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
You spoke to Anna Rowe, who owns an advocacy group for victims of these romance scams.
Yes.
She founded the grouping with Cecily from the Tinder Swindler documentary, which I found really, really interesting.
Yes.
But can you tell us a bit about Anna's personal story of being involved in a scam?
So she was possibly unusual in that hers was an online, an in-person rather than online scammer. It was a guy who targeted up to 200 women. So she met him online, and it was that. And I'm sure she said when she watched The Tinder Swindler, it was like reading a script of her own life. It was that instant connection, absolute love bombing. I want to spend my life with you. You're amazing. We share so many interests. And it was a physical relationship as well with a guy. She thought, well, this is it. This is the one for me. And so the way she explains it is that victims are kept in that honeymoon phase. That I'm sure anybody who's been in a relationship with a narcissist will be familiar with the term love bombing, where it's just full on constantly. So you never come down. You never come down to the level where you're debating, do I want to pick his socks up off the floor? Because you're just in that constant golden moment. And then what her experience was that he would withdraw slightly. And she would think, apparently it's known as trauma bonding. So she would think, oh my God, have I lost the best relationship of my life? Has this guy gone? And then he would come back and she would get the happy rush, the dopamine rush, and then he would go and it would be the is it cortisol, the stress rush. So the way she described it is it's like a cycle of addiction where you're constantly kept on, highs and lows. You never reach normal. In her case as well, he was very careful not to do any financial fraud. Because she reckons that the guy was clever enough to know that if he carried out financial fraud, he was more likely to be of interest to the police. But because he was, having sex and having relationships with unsuspecting women, then that was less of a crime. And he's never been prosecuted for anything, despite a 3-year police investigation which identified up to 200 victims.
Oh my God. It's just bananas. Yeah. Like, it is just absolutely crazy. But we know they're getting more and more common. I remember last year hearing about an AI Brad Pitt deepfake that duped a woman in France out of I think it was €830,000. The numbers are staggering.
Absolutely. You do think, oh, goodness, who would fall for this? But I mean, one of the videos that Anna shared with me was from a fraudster who was demonstrating how easy it is to fool people with AI. So he went from being a young guy in his 20s to Keanu Reeves, to Billie Eilish, to a young woman, all with the voice. And it was almost undetectable. If you were looking at that, and you were, you had stars in your eyes for somebody, you would never know that you were speaking to a fake. And that's the point Anna was making. She says AI has come so far, and she says this sort of, they started to emerge sort of 2022, and they were a bit ropey. You could see the joins really, but she said now you would be hard pushed to tell that you were speaking to a fake.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in Scotland, there was that case of Adele Rennie who was duping people using AI, like voice technology, to pretend to be a doctor. It's getting so sophisticated.
Yeah, she was using a voice changer so that her victims thought that she was a man. And I mean, she had up to 100 victims. I think in her case as well, I mean, she ended up on the sex offenders register. In fact, she's been put back into jail several times. It seems to be a compulsion with her, you know, because with her there was no financial gain. It was just, I think, the control and they often, I think as well, it's when people think I'm not good enough to have a relationship with these people, so I have to pretend to be somebody else. In fact, in a lot of ways, Adele Rennie's story reminded me of the GAA catfish. You know, where there was no, it was just emotional manipulation. But there was no money changing hands. I mean, that's not to say that the emotional damage isn't there, but you know, the money was not the motivation for it.
Course. And like, it is interesting because there are two kind of distinct categories when it comes to these styles of things. There's more sophisticated groupings like the Black Axe and the Yahoo Boys, who are very sophisticated, you know, criminal gangs who target individuals. But then you also have these people who just have natural compulsion. But could you kind of tell me a bit about the Black Axe gang and the Yahoo Boys as well?
The Yahoo Boys. Well, the Yahoo Boys apparently were named because they started off on Yahoo. They back in the day. It's really sophisticated. They have universities of how to scam people. They work with psychologists who know what buttons to push, so that they'll get somebody. So they'll put out mass messages on a social media platform or dating website, and they might get, out of 150 messages, they might get one person. So that will be the kind of the entry level guys. And they will then, that person, that victim, will then be passed on to somebody who's more, in tune, or more, has had more training on how to manipulate people. So they will start the relationship, the love bombing. That they'll have looked at that person's social media. They will look at what your interests are. They'll mirror those interests. So it feels like you found a soulmate, and they will then encourage you to move to a different platform where there is less regulation and where the mass messages won't be picked up. So it's also easier to manipulate somebody. WhatsApp apparently is a favorite one, because there's nobody's looking at your WhatsApp messages apart from you, so it's quite easy to send you these messages, love bomb you again, and to keep you in that kind of that's honeymoon state. They apparently, what they'll also do is that they will look at people who are in, it's known as a hot state, so basically where you're vulnerable. You might be grieving, you might have moved house, you might have moved job, or you just might be lonely. You just might be looking for a connection with somebody. So they if they, once they pick up on that, you will then be passed on to the more experienced people who will woo you, for want of a better word, and then the money demands will start. If it's a financial fraud, then give it a couple of weeks and they'll be looking for money. With the Tinder swindler, Cecilia talks about, it was a month. She had known this guy for a month. And she ended up giving him £250,000, and it's just mind-boggling. But when somebody tells you, you're my life partner, I want to have children with you, this is it, the other thing that they can do, they're really horrible expressions for all this. Another one is pig butchering. Where you're encouraged to, because we're going to spend our future together, I want your future to be as rosy as mine, because we're going to be together forever. So I want you to invest in cryptocurrency. So I'm going to direct you to these deals, and you're going to invest a small amount at first, and you're going to get a return on it. But then the investment's going to get bigger and bigger until suddenly you've handed over your life savings, and I've scarpered. And at that final con is known as pig butchering, when you're passed to somebody, to the expert, who will then take all your money and disappear. But by that stage you've been so manipulated that you've lost all sense of reality. That's what Anna was explaining to me as well, because she goes into these scammer groups to see what their tactics are. They work with psychologists. They know how we work, how our minds work, especially when we're vulnerable. So, a lot of the times people don't stand a chance.
Oh my God. It's really, really frightening. I even heard of instances as well where scammers often will initially send their victims money. So as to gain their trust, with their affluent lifestyle, they'll kind of ply them with money in these initial stages. So the person trusts them enough that down the line, when they come asking for money from their victim, that they're willing to give it. Of course, because why would you not think to give money back if you've received this money? Of course, it's built that level of trust. But I suppose...
Yes.
What did you uncover about these scammers when speaking to Anna? And obviously, we kind of briefly touched on this, but what types of criminals are these?
They're largely criminal gangs. This is a really organised thing. It's a global thing. There's a really interesting documentary by a guy called James Blake, hunting the catfish crime gang. And one of the things that he uncovered, which I would never have thought of, was that a lot of the scammers are themselves victims of criminal gangs. So a lot of them are held in compounds where there are thousands of people. And if you don't meet a target for getting a fish on the line, then you're beaten or you're starved or you're badly treated. So you do think all these scammers are terrible people, but behind that there are global criminal gangs who are using victims to create more victims. It's a massive operation.
And I know you said that you think there's about 200 cases in Ireland at the moment, both north and south. But we know obviously that these kind of scams go underreported hugely because of a shame aspect. A lot of people don't want to admit that they have been, duped romantically. It's quite a sensitive topic. But why do you think there is such a stigma surrounding scams like these? Because obviously it's quite a common phenomenon now. I feel like we're hearing it more and more. Most days I'm watching this morning, they seem to have someone who's been duped by these romance scams. But why is it treated in secrecy, I suppose?
I suppose that when there's an element of shame, that you've been duped, because everybody thinks, of course, I would know, I would be able to spot this straight away. I think the Tinder swindler kind of brought that home as well. You think these were really smart women who were completely hooked by these guys. Their shame. The other thing is lack of action. I think people expect that there will. Unless there's financial fraud, the chances are of somebody being caught are probably fairly minimal. Apart from anything else, this person's operating. Could be on the other side of the world. So what are the chances of getting a conviction? I mean, the fact about the Tinder swindler that really brought that home to me was this guy Simon Lviv was reckoned to have swindled $10 million out of women around the world. He was only ever done for his financial crimes in Israel. He was never done for the crimes that we saw on the Tinder swindler, the terrible things that he did to those women. And you think, well, if a guy who was that big, whose fraud was that enormous, can't be caught for it, then, what are the chances of an ordinary person like you or me who's lost a couple of grand, actually getting any justice for it? But the other point that Cecilia makes in that documentary as well is not only are you devastated that you've been conned, but you're heartbroken that this person you thought you were going to spend the rest of your life with is that relationship's gone. However kind of unreasonable or irrational it might seem, you're grieving a relationship that you thought was going to be forever. So there are so many, apart from the sort of the financial implications, there's also that huge emotional wrench of somebody's broken your heart.
I suppose that's why the Two Johnnies GA Catfish podcast really did so well, and it resonated with so many people, because it kind of showed that you can be a really successful podcaster, and there are these individuals out there that kind of prey on your vulnerabilities and will mirror exactly who, you want them to be. They will copycat and they will do what you want. So I suppose, do you think it kind of proved the point that this really can happen to anyone? It doesn't discriminate necessarily on age bracket?
Oh yeah, I think absolutely it can. Because everybody wants, we all want love. Everybody wants a connection. And if somebody is setting out to prey on your vulnerabilities, then you can see how people would get caught. And when you look at the numbers of victims, I mean, the GAA catfish is certainly in the dozens that we know about. I mean, Adele Rennie in Scotland, 100. The guy who targeted Anna Rowe and catch the catfish had 200 women. And some of whom were accusing him of really, really serious sexual assaults. And so you can see how easy it would be to get caught up in that if you're. If all the right buttons are being pushed, if you're in a hot state and they keep you in that kind of addiction cycle, it would be very difficult to get out of it.
So I suppose, Roisin, we know with like AI being able to, manipulate images now and, replicate voices and all of that, it's getting very, very sophisticated. It seems that like reverse image searching an individual's photo just doesn't cut the mustard anymore. But like, what is the official guidance on, romance scams? Or if you're in an online kind of relationship, I suppose, with someone and you're feeling a bit suspect about it, what is the guidance?
So first of all, it's to get somebody to look at it with fresh eyes. So get somebody who knows you, but who's not part of this relationship, to look and see, are they? Is this interaction normal? Is this how people would usually speak to each other? Are you being love bombed? Are you being manipulated? Because if you're in that honeymoon phase, it can be difficult to see. All right, no, this isn't normal. The other red flag is money. Somebody's asking you for money, then that's a big no straight away. And it's one of those, if it's in circumstances where you wouldn't lend money to somebody that you'd met face to face, why would you lend a large amount of money to somebody that you've never met? So I mean that should be kind of big warning sign, straight away. I mean the police do recommend doing reverse image searches and all that as well. And if you Google, sort of one of the big things is oil rig worker. That's why I can't come and meet you, because I work on an oil rig. But could you send me an Amazon gift card because my computer's broken down, whatever. Do a Google search, scammer, oil rig, and it might well be that that there are many other people who have the same experience as you. So that might be an in into whether you're being scammed or not. But the other thing, I mean, I was reading this earlier on. I had never heard of the Spanish prisoner letter. I mean, these scams that was, these have been going on for hundreds of years. The Spanish prisoner letter is a bit like the Nigerian prince letter, but in that case, it was, a guy who was locked up in Spain who had a fortune that he couldn't get his hands on, but he had a daughter who needed to be married. So if you married his daughter, he would, give you the money to support her with his massive fortune, but you just needed to send him a couple of quid to get out first. It's insane. And that's hundreds of years old.
Oh my God.
So, so you do think like, these cons have been going on for years, so there have been victims for years. So I think it's one of those. I think we need to be much more sympathetic to people who have fallen victims of this, because it could be any of us. You know,
and the reason they've lasted the test of time, I suppose, is because they've been successful for so many years. Because they work really, really well.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you send out 200 letters and you get one response, but you get 30 grand out of that person, then that's a win,
Absolutely. All it takes is to be lucky once, pretty much.
Yeah.
But Roisin, thank you so much for coming on Crime World.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you're a crimeworld.com subscriber, you've probably already binged on our latest exclusive podcast series, The Regency 10 Years On, from the hit that changed gangland forever. This 6-part anniversary special revisits that fateful day when David Byrne was shot dead at the Northside Hotel, igniting a bloody feud between the Kinahan and Hutch gangs, one of the deadliest rivalries in Irish history. Here's a taste of the new series, exclusive to crimeworld.com subscribers. So that Friday was one of those really quiet days. I mean, we all knew that Daniel Kinahan was in Dublin for the Clash of the Clans boxing weigh-in. At least we knew he was due into Dublin the next day. That Clash of the Clans bout match had been heavily advertised, but the day itself there was just little going on.
So there was very little happening that day. It's February. It's kind of a quiet enough time for news in general. And Alan Cherry and Ernie Leslie were on the road. They were at another story actually in Finglas.
What was that, do you remember?
Well, it was one of these classic sort of district court stories where a guy had, I think some teenagers had thrown stones at his car and he got out and slapped the teenager. Always great kind of human stories because some people feel sorry for the teenagers and some people don't. And so Alan had been out there, but the guy had moved on. He'd called out to his house to see if he wanted to talk. He'd moved on, he wasn't there. And we discussed going to the Regency earlier. And I said, look, just go along and see what happens, divert there. We obviously weren't expecting anything. And obviously that point of Alan being there would be the subject of conspiracy, but we'll get into that at a later point.
For sure. So it was a case really that day of, one thing hadn't worked out, so go to the next. But also there was definitely a general sense of, if we could be there, just in case.
Yes, and as you said, to see who was standing beside the Kinahans and who wasn't from that bigger organised crime group. So Alan and Ernie went out. I got a call. I think you got a call almost simultaneously, but I got a call from Alan. I'd spoken to him earlier on the day saying, see what happens. And he phoned me up and said, there's after been a shooting and I think we've got a picture. And I actually went, yeah, very funny. But of course, he stopped me and said, no, I'm serious. We're after, there's some guys come out with a gun, there's shots fired and there's total and utter chaos. And, our first thought is, get yourself safe. I have to admit, my second thought was, I hope they did get good pictures. But, you're still thinking they have to get safe. I mean, I know you probably got a similar call because Ernie and Alan obviously were in the same Jeep.
And of course, Ernie's the guy taking the photographs,
yes.
So he's on the phone to me. So I actually had gone for a pizza for lunch and I had come back over to the office and the phone rings and it was Ernie. And I answered and he was panicked on the other end of the phone. This was real high octane stuff. And he's still trying to take photos. He's trying to tell me what's happened. He's told me he thinks he's got a good one of one of the shooters as they were running from the scene. He was trying to call up the photograph on the back of his camera.
Yeah.
Because it would have taken him a while to get it onto a screen, but he'd also sent it into the office.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he was kind of in the middle of doing a number of things. And as I was on the phone to him from memory, the photograph came into the office and we put it up on the big screen. And it was clear to see that this wasn't just one of the shooters as he suspected, but it was two. One of them was dressed as a woman.
Which is, of course, there was also this confusing story about guards coming in with weapons, and obviously we know now that they weren't ERU guys, they were guys dressed as them. But Alan was telling me this, there was talk of these guards, and then obviously there was, the crowd fleeing from the scene. So it was all confusing. But as you said, Ernie had taken a picture of the back of his camera. People will know what the photographer's cameras look like, and they have a little digital screen. So you don't see it in great detail. But we knew this is a once-in-a-lifetime photograph has been gotten.
Yeah, as soon as it came in. And of course, look, the newsrooms aren't as busy as they used to be. They used to be very busy, buzzy places with phones ringing everywhere. And it felt like a proper newsroom that day. I remember everybody's phone was going. People were hearing little bits about it. The news was starting to break about it. And of course, we were there sitting in the office with this photo. There's that sort of news sense in you that you want to run this.
Yeah.
And at the time, we weren't putting stuff up online. This would have been held for the paper on the Sunday, and this is a Friday afternoon. We had something really special here. But we also, I think, knew the guards were going to be desperate for that picture because they were two gunmen running from a scene of a crime. So it was a very compromised situation, and there was a bit of arguments going on, and there was voices were raised.
Totally. I mean, because it is complex. I mean, normally the journalism likes to keep itself separate from the Gardaí investigations. So Garda investigations go on and journalism reports on them. But obviously then you're put in this compromising position because you have guys running out visibly with handguns in their hands. And, they're obviously then disappeared into the ether. And you have to have a discussion about what is your civic responsibility in terms of, do you help the guards? You don't want these armed gunmen to run down the street and kill another few people. So it was a complex one, and people were aware straight away that the guards are going to want these pictures and want to use it for their purposes. And we also have our purposes, which is to tell what happened and to report on the news. So there was a conflict straight away.
From my memory, as the afternoon went on and I was talking to contacts and to other people who were involved in crime journalism, etc., it became apparent that there were no guards at the weigh-in. That in actual fact, the guards didn't seem to be there at all. They were called literally by the hotel and had arrived in response to what had already gone on. Of course, David Byrne had been shot dead in the reception of the hotel. We were getting photographs in later in the day, which showed a very shocked-looking Liam Byrne standing outside the hotel, his hands in his pockets, standing beside his cousin Liam Rowe, another significant cartel member. There was no sign of Daniel Kinahan. I was getting calls from people who were telling me that these professional killers had been flown into the country and had already been flown out. There was rumours, there was spin, and also there was the general, I suppose, conversations in regards to, oh my God, what is going to happen next? I mean, all anyone knew for sure was something was going to happen. David Byrne was a very, very senior lieutenant. He was also from criminal royalty from the Byrne family. His brother-in-law is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. His brother is Liam Byrne, and he's very much at the heart of the Kinahan cartel. We knew from the beginning that this attack had occurred as part of the rivalry between the Kinahan and Hutch factions of what was once the one organisation. And I think everybody was really trying to predict what this might lead to, but nobody could have guessed.
Nobody could have guessed. And of course, those rumours straight away went around. It was straight away focused on the Hutch gang. But at this time, if you remember, while there had been other incidents, for example, an attempted hit on Jerry Hutch in Lanzarote, those incidents weren't always public. People were straight away thinking this isn't the type of normal organised crime operation. They were looking at the weapons, saying, is there a paramilitary organisation involved here? Nobody knew fully. And of course, what people did fear straight away was, no matter what, people knew how big and how powerful the Kinahans had become, and the likelihood of them not striking back was inevitable. That blood was going to flow.
That bit absolutely 100%. But at that very early stage, I recall contacts of mine suggesting that the Hutches were an army. Did they have the backing of the dissidents? Was this going to, were they going to be very heavily armed because of that? They had contacts in the north. It was like as if people were trying to size up how two Premiership teams were going to play against one another. That's what it felt like. You've been listening to an extract from the Regency, 10 years on from the hit that changed gangland forever. Visit crimeworld.com and subscribe to hear the full series now. And you'll also get exclusive access to our other podcast deep dives on the Dapper Don, Christy Kinahan, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, and more.